Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Pierce, and I'm the director of the Transnational Literature Series at Brookline Booksmith, just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and your host for today's conversation with Maria Stepanova, Sasha Dugdale, and Elif Batuman. The Transnational Series focuses on stories of migration, the intersection of politics and literature, and works in translation. The series was launched in early 2018, and while we miss having in-person events at the store, we love having this opportunity to connect with you all virtually. Virtual events have also allowed us to come up with some creative partnerships, and for this event, we've collaborated with a bookstore we deeply admire. Lighthouse Books is a queer-owned and women-led independent bookshop based in Scotland. They are an unapologetically activist, intersectional, feminist, anti-racist, LGBTQ+ community space. While Lighthouse is currently closed to the public for in-store browsing, you can still purchase books on their website. I encourage anyone joining us from the UK to support them in these challenging times. I just want to offer a quick Zoom webinar tutorial. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a few icons. One of those is a Q&A icon, where you can enter in your questions at any time during the conversation. Another button will get you in the chat window. That space is there for you all. Please feel free to chat during the event. My colleague Bradley will be in the chat as well, dropping in useful information, including links to books by our authors. We do make every effort to keep these events free to attend in the hopes that you will purchase the featured books from us. So thank you in advance for taking a look and supporting independent bookstores. And finally, you can see us, but we can't see you, so relax and please enjoy the conversation. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Maria Stepanova, Sasha Dugdale, and Elif Batuman to discuss and celebrate the release of In Memory of Memory. Maria Stepanova is a poet, essayist, and journalist, and the editor-in-chief of the online newspaper Kolta. In 2018, she was awarded the Bolshaya Kniga Award for In Memory of Memory. Sasha Dugdale is a poet and translator. She has published 5 collections of poetry. The most recent, Deformations, is shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot Prize. She is a translator of Russian drama and poetry and former editor of the international magazine Modern Poetry and Translation. And today's moderator, Elif Batuman, is the author of The Possessed, an essay collection, and The Idiot, a novel. The Idiot was a finalist for the 2018 Pulitzer Prize in Fiction. She's been a staff writer at The New Yorker since 2010. I'm so pleased to have them all here together in conversation. And now Maria, Sasha, and Elif.
Thank you so much, Pierce, for that introduction. And I'm so excited to be here to celebrate this incredible book, which everyone should pre-order right now. And I think we're going to start by hearing Maria read for us a little bit in Russian, and then Sasha is going to read for us in English. And there's going to be a few readings, and then thank you for that vote of book purchasing that I see in the comment section. And then we're going to have a little bit of conversation in between the different readings, and then we're going to open it up to audience questions. So also be thinking about your questions, because now we're just going to hear the questions of obsessed superfan Elif for now. But okay, so first let's start with the first reading by Maria Stepanova and Sasha Dugdale.
Thank you so much, dear Elif. And I'll just add some words of gratitude to all of you for this extraordinary gathering. Thank you, Pierce, for inviting us. And well, I'm honored and overjoyed, and well, intensely happy to be here today. Thank you so much for sharing the evening with me. Well, it is evening in Moscow. So I'll read a very short excerpt of the book in Russian, so you'll be able to be aware of the sound, how it sounds, how it goes in the original. Дочь фотографа. Предположим, что мы имеем дело с любовной историей. Предположим, что у нее есть герой. Вот он с 10 лет собирается написать книгу о своем роде. И не о маме с папой, а о дедах и прабабках, которых толком не видел, но знает, что они были. Он обещает себе эту книгу и откладывает. Для этого надо стать старше и знать больше. Годы проходят, но он не становится старше, а знает только меньше. За время пути он успел растерять и то, что знал. Иногда его самого удивляет настойчивое желание рассказать хоть что-то об этих малозаметных людях, укрывшихся на теневой стороне истории, да так там и просидевших. Герой считает, что написать о них его долг, но почему это долг? И перед кем, если они-то как раз хотели быть в тени?
Thank you very much. And now we'll hear the English.
The daughter of a photographer. Let's suppose for a moment that we are dealing with a love story. Let's suppose it has a main character. This character has been thinking of writing a book about her family since the age of 10, and not just about her mother and father, but her grandparents and great-grandparents, whom she hardly knew, but knew that they existed. She promises herself she will write this book, but keeps putting it off, because in order to write such a book, she needs to grow up and to know more. The years pass, and she doesn't grow up. She knows hardly anything, and she's even forgotten what she knew to begin with. Sometimes she even startles herself with her unrelenting desire to say something, anything about these barely seen people who withdrew to the shadowy side of history and settled there. She feels as if it is her duty to write about them. But why is it a duty? And to whom does she owe this duty when those people chose to stay in the shadows?
Thank you so much. I have so many questions about that. This idea of writing as a duty that you realize in childhood is so familiar to me. So one thing I wanted to ask is really, where does it come from? To what extent does it come from a person's family? What makes one person, the writer, be born in the family who has to tell that story? And then the other question that I have is about voice. So you talk about deciding that you had to write the story from age 10. How did you get to the voice that we're hearing now? And then I thought we could also hear from Sasha about translating that voice and choosing an English version of it, because I thought I didn't read the whole book in Russian because it would have taken me 10 years and it would have been the memory of the memory of the memory of the memory. But from what I saw, it seemed, I got kind of like a Mandelstam Tsvetaeva poet in prose, kind of avant-garde vibe. And from the translation, I got a much more Zebaldi kind of feeling, like some of the comma splices had been sort of turned into sentences. I felt that there was a little bit less of the voice of the child and more of the voice of the adult. And I don't know if I'm hallucinating that. So I wanted to ask you guys, is that something that you talked about? So that's sort of a whole pile of questions from which I thought you could pick and choose what you would like to talk about.
Well, it is, in a way, it is just one question, because the matter of picking your voice when you're writing about your family is, at least for me, more a matter of prolonging someone else's voices. And I was thinking when I've started writing the book that my main goal is maybe to hide my own voice, to push it to the margins in a way, to make the other voices more distinctive, and the people who are denied of voice by the forces of history and simply by being dead, making their voices, their faces more clear, more visible, more audibly insistent. And so I was trying to to stay away from writing with a full voice, with all the possible, well, I don't know, beauty and flourish and whatever else. And I'm simply stunned with Sasha's translation, because I suppose the writing voice of this book has kind of an elusive quality that she so brilliantly recreated in her translation.
Thank you so much. And Sasha, how did you arrive at the voice? And was that something that you both discussed? Or was it your journey?
I've known Maria for quite a while. And before I started translating this book, I was translating Maria's poetry. And we spent quite a lot of time talking together. And I'd visit Maria in Moscow and in Berlin, and we'd talk and talk. So in fact, there's an element to translating the book, which was just an extension of all the endless kitchen table discussions we've had with a cup of coffee or a glass of red wine. And so a lot of it felt very, very sort of intimate and it was very dear to me, but I could hear Maria's voice when I read each line, and I could see Maria thinking about it, and I could see the book as her and her journey. So there was certainly an element of that in it. And then the other part, I think, is just that Russian's a very different language to English, of course, and there are needs to change and modify structures in Russian. And particularly, for example, Russian's an inflected language, so you can run a long sentence, many, many lines. You can have a sentence pages long, really, and it's completely clear to everyone what's going on. Whereas that's just not the case in English. So you have to do something very different to create the same impression. So working out how to do that was a challenge, but it was quite an organic thing, I think. And I always just kept thinking about all the conversations and the ways that you express yourself, Maria, in Russian. And I just so much wanted to be able to convey what you were like. And because it just sort of enhances literature, I think, to have you in English.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And how great to get to translate someone whose voice you know, both from poetry and from real life. I had just one more question for Maria before we move on to the next reading, which is, you talk about this feeling of a duty or a debt that you already felt from age 10. This is, asking for a friend. Did you feel that you had discharged that once the book came out? Do you feel relieved? I hope so.
Well, for a while, and somewhere closer to the end of the book, I found a metaphor that I suppose serves the situation right. I was traveling along with my familial stories, like a huge suitcase you're dragging along with you throughout the big cities of the world, and you are well familiar with the suitcase and its insides, but still you are never able to totally forget about it. It is always there, and the little wheels they are, they make the
I know that suitcase well.
Sound, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And for a while, I was endlessly relieved. I thought, speaking frankly, I was finally done with them. And of course, as it happens, life is more generous than we suppose it to be, because I was telling mostly a story of different impossibilities: the impossibility of going back, and impossibility of conveying the other people's experiences, the impossibility of really knowing what had happened and how, and lots of them, much more than I am able to enumerate right now. And then after the book was out, maybe in a year or so, things just began appearing. People I was totally sure I'll never know anything about, like a long lost lover of my grandmother Sarah, who was Bulgarian, and I was endlessly trying to locate his descendants to know at least something. I've never seen his face because she somehow didn't keep his photograph. There was a number of letters and a story that was traveling through the century about this boy from the beginning of the 20th century and nothing else. And then when I was presenting the book in Bulgaria, I was on the stage and then a person, and I decided to tell this story. I was avoiding it beforehand because I didn't want to, well, to flash my Bulgarian story as if it was a pass to an entry ticket or something. But I mentioned it, and then the guy who was moderating the thing, he began sending text messages. Then he stood up and started wandering around the stage. And then he came back and told me that he is a descendant of that guy my grandmother was in love in 1910. And I mean, that's how it is happening. Exactly, a pure miracle, and maybe also a sign that not every impossibility is totally impossible.
Oh, that's incredible. Wow, was that a possibility that you thought of when you were writing the book, that by writing it, you were going to generate more material on the subject, or were you really just thinking of getting rid of the suitcase?
Well, when I was finishing the book, I was both happy and rather desperate because especially when you are writing about things that were happening on European soil in the 20th century, what you are able to get usually is just bits and pieces, broken cups, half burnt letters, nothing, or traces of nothing. And so I was sure that I'll never be able to know a line more than I already knew. And the fact that still more than a century after, something could just emerge, it was a revelation.
It's like in your book, it's like you dug up a secretiki, and it was still there.
Yeah,
so cool.
A secretic that my grandmother or someone did place there a century ago. Yeah. It was mind-blowing.
Should we maybe go to the next reading about the photograph? The Sex and the Dead?
Or maybe the secretiki.
Oh yeah, let's do secretiki.
Yeah.
Let's do the secretiki. Anyone who lived in 1970s Russia will recognize in Cornell's boxes the game of Sekretiki, or Little Secrets, the passion of my childhood. Nothing in the humdrum reality of this time could have explained the appearance of the game. Strictly speaking, it was only a game in the sense that it had rules. Sekretiki wasn't just any activity, it was a secret that you shared only with your closest friends, and it was like no other game played in the street or at school. It was underground in the most direct sense of the word, because the little secrets were kept under the ground, like treasure or dead bodies. In the country where people were always bent over the land, planting seeds or digging out food, there would have been nothing special in this. But we were children of the city, who knew the way home from school by the cracks in the pavement, and we had no relationship with the black and granular earth that every spring gave the acacia and the lilac its freedom. To make a little secret, you had to drop down and press yourself against the earth. Choose a place, dig a little hole, look around and check no one is watching, put in the precious object, cover it with a piece of scrubbed clean glass, and then pour the earth back over, tamp it down so it looks untouched. Now I realize that these tiny tombs lined with foil and filled with a tiny supply of all the beauty in the world, were very like ancient burial chambers, with their assortment of objects ready for the immortal life. Very special things were chosen for the little secrets, things that were few and far between. Gold and silver paper, feathers, clippings from newspapers with a photograph of an actor or actress, precious beads or buttons, sometimes even tiny little dolls or figurines. The essential layer of glass turned the little secret into a shop window, waiting for someone to come past and look in. There was nothing much for the Secretiki above ground. The aesthetic system of Soviet life was thorough and in its own way convincing, but it adhered to an unspoken bias towards understated, decent, cheerful modesty with no pretense to the gaudy or extravagant. Some insignificant departures from the norm were acceptable, as long as these were only small steps out of line. Sentimentality, the soft focus of tenderness or grief as a response to understandable and general feelings like yearning for lost youth, or love for one's children, or hope for something better. Anything suggesting equality or unity was acceptable, but eccentricity, standing out from the crowd without justification, was quite another thing. Anything that could be interpreted as outlandish behavior, even earrings in the ears of schoolgirls, was seen as an attempt to break through into a space labelled unacceptable exclusivity, and that sort of thing, opulence, plumes and tails, silk stockings and sparklers, was in danger of destroying the general equilibrium and had to be kept at bay. Perhaps that is why it now feels to me as if the little secrets, filled with the outlandish, a concentration of the burlesque, forbidden beauty, crystal beads, cut-out paper roses, became political refuges, crossing both state and other boundaries. Years later, I came across the word in a book of memoirs, a short text written in English in the 1950s with nothing to do with the underground sparkle of foil and glass. The book described the period of pogroms in the south of Ukraine in 1919 through the eyes of a little girl, how the people in the village lay awake at night waiting for them to come, and then they did. It recounted how the women and children hid wherever they could, under fences and behind tree stumps, and then returned to their houses to wash and dress the murdered. The people living there had different ways of hiding, the hiding places necessary when flight is impossible, brick-lined secret rooms, underground holes, dugouts with whole families sheltering in them to sit out the pogrom. Sometimes they managed to escape notice. The memoir gave these hiding places a name. It was spelt with English letters, but the Cyrillic pulsed feverishly from within, Sekreten.
Thank you. What a great passage, because it really brings out this quality that the whole book has of just shifting metaphors that are, it's just brilliant. What really jumped out to me in that passage and in the metaphor of the Secretiki is the way, the nature of burial and its relationship to writing, that on the one hand, we think of you bury something to hide it, but on the other hand, you bury something to save it and to preserve it. And I don't remember if it was in that passage, but in general, there are allusions in this book to the Egyptian burial chambers, which are, they're buried, but they're also on display. And it made me think about the way Maria, as the writer who has all of this family material, the way you kind of don't know, did your family bury it to hide it, or did they bury it sort of to save it for you? And what is your book doing? What kind of burial? And the other thing that really struck me was the way that you show that burying something is inscribing it politically, that the Secretiki were like the Samizdat, they were like hiding people from pogroms. And that seems true of writing also. So I was just wondering if you could talk about the relationship between burying, hiding, displaying, and writing and inscribing in politics.
Well, I suppose everything that has something to do with memory is becoming, and with the past is becoming, more and more explicitly political over the years. and maybe even more over the last few decades, when the territory of the past is becoming a land of, a place where we are witnessing never-ending memory wars, and not necessarily between some state and the people, which also happens, but there are civil wars of memory quite visible in contemporary Russia, of course, but also altogether elsewhere. Just name the country. And I suppose that nowadays the dignity of the dead is becoming a matter of first importance, because anyone can do anything with them, with their memory. It can be distorted in any possible way. As far as I know, in Britain, there is, for instance, you cannot sue someone for libeling the dead, because you cannot, the dead can be easily insulted. They are becoming common property. And that is becoming more and more threatening, at least for me, because they are endlessly fragile. And I'm seriously, well, not exactly seriously, but still seriously in a way, I'm seriously considering, well, writing some declaration of the rights of the dead, because they are the only humans on Earth that have no rights and no one to defend their rights. So yes, I suppose the way one is dealing with the legacy, with the posthumous legacy of these people, well, she is to be very conscious and very aware of what she is doing. And if she's replacing their fragile remnants with some ideas or projections or hopes of her own, not necessarily with some evil intent. It could be done with the best intentions possible. But still, there is something sad about this easy replacement of what had happened with the fantasy, custom-tailored fantasy of how we would prefer it to happen.
I love that idea of the book about the rights of the dead. It's like dead souls. It's like myortwie dushi, but opposite. Instead of selling them, you're like restoring them.
Yeah, abolitioning.
Yeah. That's so cool. Maybe we have 2 more readings. Maybe we should do one of them and then open up to questions. So we have either the Saratov incident or the Sex and the Dead. I love both of these. Do you guys have a preference for which one to do?
What do you think, Maria?
Sasha, you decide. Maybe the photograph.
Yes. So I should just say really quickly that this is lovely, because it's actually, you can probably tell the sort of irrepressible sense of humor and joy in the writing as well. And I think this has a sense of something divinely comic as well as everything else in it. So it's it begins with the finding of a photograph. I could see right away what sort of photograph it was. Not a picture or a postcard or, say, a picture calendar. A naked woman lay on a divan looking at the camera. It was an amateur shot taken long ago, already yellowing with age. But the feelings it aroused in me were utterly unlike the way great-grandmother's Paris letters or grandfather's jokey poems had made me feel. This picture added nothing to the throat-tightening feeling of family collectivity, to the black and white, many-headed chorus of unknown relatives, always happening just behind my back, or to the hunger I felt when I saw something unknown and foreign. the promenade at Nice by night on a pre-revolutionary postcard. There was something clearly illicit about the photograph, although that could hardly have bothered me, quietly avoiding my parents and on my own private search for the forbidden. There was a faint licentiousness in it too, although the woman's nakedness was open, straightforward, and full to the camera. Strangest of all, the photograph had no relationship to me at all. It belonged to someone else. The fact that the wallet had lost its owner long before did not change this feeling of strangeness. The woman lying on the leather sofa was not beautiful. My sense of aesthetics had been formed by the cast gallery in the Pushkin Museum and a book on ancient Greek myth. I was affronted by her many bodily defects. Her legs were shorter than they were supposed to be, and her breasts smaller, but her bottom was much larger, and her tummy pudgy in a way that was very unlike marble. All these defects made her look lively, as anything living in ignorance of perfection looks lively. She was grown up, in her 30s, as I now realise, and not a nude, simply a completely naked woman, although that wasn't the most striking thing. The woman was looking straight at the viewer, that is, at the camera, at me. Her stare had such intensity, it was utterly unlike the radiantly unfocused gaze of a goddess or a model in an artist's studio. Her gaze had a very direct purpose to it. Between the woman and her witness, something was happening or was going to happen. Strictly speaking, her stare was already that happening. It was the conduit or the corridor, the black hole. Her face was wide, flat, with slits for eyes, and there was nothing else in it apart from the intensity of the stare. Her communication was intended for the bearer of the photo, but I had suddenly somehow taken his place, and this made the situation both tragic and absurd. It was so very obvious that the lady on the leather sofa, unlike the whole of art and the whole of history, which was definitely intended for me and took me into account, didn't have me in mind as a viewer, didn't want me, and I knew with certainty that someone else should have been in my place, someone with a name and a surname and possibly even a moustache.
That's fantastic. I think the really fascinating thing to me in that scene is the economical way that it points out the extent to which a work of art is defined by the implied viewer or the implied reader. And I was just thinking, so much of this book is about the sense of responsibility of being the writer in the family, or the one who has to carry the family's message forward. And yet they're very chatty. All of the relatives, they're constantly, we leave a lot of records, a lot of letters and different things. It's not that there's no other writer, there's no other writer who's writing for other people. And I guess I just wanted to ask, and this is to an extent a question for Sasha also, but to ask about the implied reader. Maria, who were you thinking of? Did the implied reader change for you from from when you were 10 to over the years? Who did you think of reading this book? And is the voice very different for you? You do so many different kinds of writing, poetry and journalism. Are they all for the same person? Is it, and in translation, it almost seems like when I was hearing Sasha talk about translating this book, like if Masha is has to be the carrier of the message of her family to everyone else, Sasha has to be the carrier of the book to everyone else. And in a way, you're doing the same kind of thing. And I guess I was just wondering how you think about that and how you conceptualize the person that you're writing for.
It is, well, in my case, it is quite simple, but I don't know if it sounds right, because while writing, I was thinking and addressing the people I've been writing of, and that it makes me uneasy, because I know that, well, it's the first time I've been writing prose. I'm not a prose writing, and it's different with poetry. And I know as a reader that a writer, a real writer, is supposed to be thinking about her audience, about the reader, and do some things to go to some extent to please the reader. But what I've been trying to do is, well, there is this Joseph Brodsky's essay titled "To Please a Shadow." I was trying to please my shadows, and I was very serious with doing all I could do to make them feel good, feel, well, content with being put into a book. So to some extent, I was thinking of the book in almost in spatial terms, as if I was constructing an installation, a living space where I could place the letters, objects, stories, faces of my loved ones, and to surround them with other beautiful stories so they would feel, well, comfortable. And I was so busy with doing it that I just didn't think of anyone else. But maybe Sasha did.
I think translation's a little bit different because you're looking two ways. You are looking out towards an audience, but more importantly, you're looking back at a text that's already there. So you're essentially, the conversation is with the text that's already there. And that's the conversation that occupies me mostly when I'm translating. I think there was one element to the whole endeavor that was really attractive to me, and that was that I've had a long engagement with Russia, and it began when I think there's a poet, a Russian poet who I love. I think Maria loves her too, Yelena Schwartz. And Yelena was going to come and do a talk about Soviet and post-Soviet poetry, and she called it the closed garden of Russian poetry. And so for a long time, I felt that I was mediating between a closed garden and the rest of the world. And in Maria's text, there's this moment of sort of transcending all of that into this common history. And I was really desperate to somehow get that across, the sort of universality, as well as the very specific nature of Maria's search for her ancestors. There's something gloriously sort of not just European, but actually global about it.
Thank you. There's so much more I want to ask, but I think we have to open it to the audience. And I guess one thing that we had talked about to maybe kick off the larger conversation is, I'm sure a lot of the readers are wondering, Maria, you're in Moscow now at such a divergent moment, seemingly divergent moment in the history of what's been going on there. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what it feels like to be there now, and then maybe Pierce can come in and moderate the audience questions.
Well, what is happening now in Moscow, and not only in Moscow, all over Russia, after the first wave of protests that was moving forward for the last 2 weeks, we were having something very different in the state's approach to the situation. And when I'm saying the state, of course, I mean Vladimir Putin and his administration, because here at a moment like this one, it is simple that the country is being ruled manually. It is not the police department working in its usual way, detaining people or trying to shut the protests up. It is all a part of a plan that I suppose was built up long ago. And the plan is raising a level of violence raising the state-inflicted violence to the unheard of, unprecedented level. That's something that never happened beforehand in these quantities. It happened in Belarus, but in the different circumstances and with a different feel. But now, during the last day of protests, over 5,000 of people were detained, and a big part of them were beaten or tortured or jailed in undescribable circumstances. 28 people, for instance, put in a jail cell fit for 8, etc., etc. And it has just begun, so we can only guess the consequences and what the next stage is going to be. But what is quite definite for now is that the state is changing its way of keeping a dialogue with its citizens. And well, yeah.
Thank you very much. Maybe it's time now to open it up to the reader, to the audience.
Thank you, Maria. That was very hard to hear, but very important to hear. We do have many questions. I'll try to get through as many as we can and also not keep you all too long. Sasha, we have a couple questions for you. The first, Sasha mentioned about the need to change structures from Russian to English. Would it be possible to give an example?
It's really hard to, it's very hard to think of an example off the top of my head. I should have come ready provided with something. But what I can perhaps say is that, just to explain that because Russian is inflected, you can have a long sentence in which every word is very clear and its relationship to the other words is very clear. Whereas in English, that the logical sense of a sentence depends on the word order. So you trying to build a very long sentence in English is extremely hard. And I can't give you a precise example of that, but that was something that I came across constantly. The sort of automatic response is to shorten the lines, shorten the sentences, make them more chopped up, kind of split it all apart. But I was really, really keen that I would try and keep some of Maria's flow and lyric, because Maria's a poet. It was really important to me that the music of the original was somehow reflected in the English. So I was very uninclined really to change that in the English.
Thank you. And the next one for you, Sasha, is, let me find it. Someone would like to know more about your translation process. Could you please tell a bit more about the challenges, inspirations, and curiosities that came with translating this book?
One of the really interesting things about translating this book is it's intensely visual, as you'll find out when you read it. The visual is absolutely at the heart of the book. The photographs Maria starts her process with, the constant references to visual arts from Rembrandt to Joseph Cornell. And it was really important for me to see all those images. And so I think one of the challenges was making my own relationship with them, because I couldn't simply be in that way a conduit. I had to actually have a relationship with them in order to translate what Maria was saying about them. One of the funniest things was with the photographs. Maria has some descriptions of photographs, family photographs, and I would translate the descriptions without having seen the photographs. And it was a little bit like a game, because when I finally did see them, Maria showed me a few of them, I was trying to match my English back to the photograph. And there's a sort of triangulation process really that goes on with visual image and then the text and the translation. And I really enjoyed that process. It was a bit like a game. And I realized some of the translations I'd have to change in order to have a different relationship with the actual original object.
Thank you, Sasha. And Maria, the first question for you. It seems that this brilliant book is warning us against the error of seeking out memory from place or particular landscapes. What are the true vectors of memory from your perspective?
The true?
The true vectors.
Wow.
It's a big question.
Yeah, exactly. I should write another book, or at least a half, to answer it in a right way. But well, that's the problem with memory, I suppose. Speaking of vectors, thinking of the constant backward movement, anyone who is memorizing something is trying to move forward with this backward motion. Still, it is amazing what a number of small movements you are supposed to do to keep up with the work of comparison. It is, well, it can a bit remind of money exchange, because there is a currency of the past that is not working anymore. And if you want to understand something about the emotional memory, about the way a certain line of thought was expressing itself in this or that sentence structure, you need to make comparisons with what is happening around you. The comparisons that are never going to be exact, but still you are endlessly doing these small petty movements for the sake of two things: of knowing well enough where you're standing, and out of sheer fear, you'll somehow fall through. Like the Alice's well, you're just falling through and you're never knowing where you're going to land.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's lovely. This is a particularly fun question. Where do we find the secret hiding places today to store our bits of memory and our treasures?
Well, everywhere. But the question is, what is the right way of storing them? Because you have to find a precise spot, you have to keep them in secret, and still you want to invite people to share the secrets with. And it needs a bit of strategic thinking.
I love that. And one more.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go right ahead.
I'm sorry to butt in, but the question about the vectors of memory really made me think about the passage that we didn't get to read about the wrong house in Saratov, which was something that another reader answered. I was wondering if you could talk about that, because there's the scene in the book where you painstakingly research a house where you think that one of your relatives lived, and then you have this kind of profound experience there, and then later you find out it's the wrong house. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry, that was a spoiler.
Okay, it was a spoiler, yeah. But,
it was a spoiler. But what's the status of that experience that you had, and what's the status of the wrong house? I mean, to me, it seems it's a very valuable, like you had a real valuable experience there, and in some way it wasn't the wrong house.
Yes, precisely. I do believe, maybe most of all, I do believe in the truth of a revelation, of a epiphany, because you never know when it is going to find you. And if you are trying to stage it to find the best circumstances, there is another story in the book that is it kind of doubles the story about the wrong house on the right street. I've been, after a number of other travels, I came over to Paris because I've managed to find the exact house where my grandmother used to live while a student at the Sorbonne. And what was particularly interesting, it was made in the hotel. So I could actually pay for a chance to spend a night or a couple of nights under the same roof than she did 100 years ago. And so, of course, I was tempted and I couldn't resist, and I came over, and I was expecting something. I couldn't exactly say what exactly, but, well, some scrap, her signature in the guest book. There was no guest book when she was living there, but whatever, maybe some miraculous, spectacular dream, something. And nothing happened to me in Paris. Besides Paris, I wasn't intensely watching because I was pursuing my lost grandmother. And after a couple of days, I had a bout of flu, and so I was just lying there almost unconscious until the end of the voyage, because that's how the past works. If you are pursuing it too intensely, it just strikes back, telling you that it knows better what to show you and when to do it. And yeah.
This one plays nicely with that last question. How do you think it would have affected your writing if you wouldn't have had the chance to visit all of those places?
That's a perfect question, because now I'm writing another prose book that the only way I'm capable of writing, that is involving a certain story I want to research, a person I am kind of in love with, and I want to know more about her. And I was doing the research for quite a few months in the beginning of 2020. And then in March, I was just stopped in my tracks and forced to sit down, and I've been self-isolated for some 10 months at the dacha at the countryside, 80 kilometers from Moscow, in the middle of nowhere, heaps of snow around, and nothing to help me with visualizing the places and roads I would so eagerly want to see. And you have to find some replacement, another line of work, another way of feeling or experiencing the same. And that's what I am trying to do, because if you are unable to do something, you can do it from another side of the page.
Lovely. Okay, this is a hard question. Each family has parts that aren't easy to talk about, or parts that elicit guilt in future generations. How did you deal with this, and what were your lessons?
Well, I am relatively lucky. Yeah, one could even say privileged, because unlike some friends of mine, or unlike some authors of the books I've been reading for decades, the particular past of my family was not too awful. There were no direct perpetrators, or no one was working at the secret police, for instance. And it would be hard for me to be facing such kind of a story. But we know beautiful examples of and wonderful writers who did exactly this. And they were able to work with it, to tell their story, to preserve in a way the dignity of the dead, and still to be able to convey the story in its entirety. It's a hard job, but it is possible to do it. The moral question I was facing was a bit different. As I've been saying, my family was quite an ordinary one, and they were very cautious not to become too visible. And how far could I go in revealing their ordinary, non-spectacular little secrets who have no big historic interest? They were not great writers or warriors or anything of the kind you're finding on a library shelf with biographies. Is it right to reveal the nakedness of your own family? And that's the question I have no answer to, because there are always two urges competing. One of them is to save your loved ones from dissolving, from disappearing. You want the memory of them to live for, well, if not for centuries, but maybe for decades, for a couple of years, for a couple of months. And for doing that, for liberating them from this cage of invisibility, you have to make them visible. And I don't have an answer. I just wrote the book, but I'm trying to discuss the matter in some chapters.
Thank you. Well, there are many questions, so I'm just going to try and summarize a few together. Sadly, we will not be able to get to all of them, but they are incredible. Thank you all.
A great book brought together great readers.
Absolutely. Well, this one is interesting. It seems like Russian readers, especially those who are alive for some of the Soviet experience, have a particular relationship with memory. Could Maria say a little bit about how the book lands differently for Russian readers and readers of the book in other languages?
I have to say that, strangely, I didn't suppose it at the beginning when writing the book or when editing it, and I didn't think about it much. But after that, I was launching the book in a few countries, and I was teaching memory writing. It is funny to be teacher of memory, but I've been teaching this tricky subject for a year in Berlin at Humboldt University, and I had two different groups. The first one was leaning more on the theory side, and the other one were people who were interested in creative writing thing. And both the groups were quite international. And from this experience, I have a feeling that there is no real difference between the way memory or familial history or the legacy of your family is perceived in Russia or in the UK or in the US or in Sweden or in Bulgaria or elsewhere. I suppose that what we are encountering is a huge cultural shift that is working, and I adore the feeling it is working as a forceful, as a glue, uniting the people from different countries and backgrounds and from different generations, because I'm meeting all the kinds of people who are interested in researching, writing, finding things about their past, and they are united with this, well, using Marianne Hirsch's term, with this post-memorial sensibility, which I find totally engaging and fascinating. And for me, it is something to hope for, because being gentle and careful and interested when you think backwards may give some new hope about our political present time, because this quality of gentleness, it could be transferred further.
Sasha, do you have anything to add to that question about how the book lands in other languages?
Not yet.
No, that's okay.
Well, I'm very interested to find out actually what people respond to. It's a matter of huge interest to me, because as I said earlier, you look with two heads. You're looking back at the Russian and forward at the English language reception. And I find it hard to predict almost. It'll be really interesting to find out what captures people's imagination. Yeah.
Lovely. So this question plays nicely with that. I love the way that Chris says this. We are the dead of the future. And I wonder if Maria feels we have a duty to record our lives in ways that might make life easier for future historians. Diaries, letters, physical ones that might survive in paper and ink, so that the future is not the same battleground for the past as the present is.
Wow, it is interesting.
Elif, I see you smiling. Do you want to say something too?
I was just thinking, what a considerate place that question comes from, of how we can be considerate future corpses. I really salute that wide public spirit that's in the question.
Yes, Maria.
I'm afraid we are already doing it, and maybe a little bit overdoing it. Just think of all the gigabytes of selfies every human being has on her or his iPhone. And I'm checking mine from time to time, and it is more than 7,000 of photographs, not all of them selfies, hopefully, but still that's a huge amount. And it makes me worried, because I have a feeling that we are so engaged with this idea of posterity that we don't have enough time to live our own lives. We are making photographs instead of them. You know this practice, a person is coming to the exhibition and takes photographs instead of looking at the pictures. Why does she do it? Because, I suppose, well, the situation of an exhibition is a bit hectic, and people are moving around and chirping and whatever else. And so you're taking a picture, hoping to give it a good view afterwards. But there is no afterwards, because no one usually comes back to these heaps of images that are being stored somewhere in the clouds or in your own mobile. It is the same thing as buying a dress or a coat, a beautiful one, and never wearing it, because you have to become better until you'll deserve wearing it. And I would propose myself to stop recording my everyday existence for a while, and maybe it will become more intense.
Thank you, Maria. This one also works well with that. Photographs play such an important role in the book. Was there a temptation to include photographs, such as when Sebald did, blurred or not quite matching the prose?
No, definitely not.
No?
But there is a simple reason. It has something to do with a question I previously answered. The thing is, I am saying so much about my relatives. I am revealing so much that I didn't want the image to match the story.
Mm.
I wanted them to be perceived, well, covered with words and not in the nude reality of a black and white photograph. So there is a chapter where I'm retelling some 20 photographs. I'm retelling them instead of showing them. And that was a conscious decision.
Sasha, do you think this project has had an impact on your own work, particularly your latest book? And if so, how?
I think there's a linguistic element to translation that does affect your own work, because at the same time as when you work, or certainly the way I translate, I really try to bring something into English that extends it for me and creates new fields, not just linguistic fields, maybe moral or philosophical fields that I can then work into. So I think there's definitely a sort of element to translation that is all about that, just making the English language more capacious in every way. That I think one of the things that is very attractive to me about Maria's work, and why I started working on the poetry translation, is that there is a similarity, or at least perhaps a parallel, in the way that we work and our interests. My last book, Defamations, is about the way we deal with legacy and myth. And so there's a lot of similarities there. And in fact, there's a poem in that collection which is really dedicated to Maria. And it's a poem in which I use the Odyssey myth of the lotus eaters to talk about memory being destroyed and what happens when memory is destroyed. And that's certainly a product of working with Maria's text and thinking about it. And essentially it's for Maria, that poem. But there are so many differences. And one of the things I should have said when we talked about landing the text in the English language is that, for example, the British audience won't have known that material disruption on the whole that a Russian audience would be very familiar with. And that's something that I thought about a lot. So my family, without having been particularly rich, there are still elements of material goods that have come through to me in a way that doesn't often happen in the Soviet experience. You know, maybe bits of cutlery or, I don't know, tablecloths, photo albums, things like that. That's pretty normal here, but it's not so usual in the Soviet Union and the post-Soviet Union. So I think there are differences in how we think about personal and family memory.
And I just wanted to add that the process of drawing inspiration from another one's work is two-sided, because after reading Sasha's Deformation, well, we talk quite a lot, and so in a way there is an ongoing exchange of ideas and images and ways of dealing with language. But I was particularly smitten with Sasha's welfare handbook, and in a number of ways, it pushed me to think forward, to think further in my poetry. And I wrote a poetic sequence that directly draws inspiration from this long poem or cycle,
which I will presently translate.
Good.
Lovely. I think that's a beautiful place to end it on. Thank you, all three of you, for being here. It's been an honor to have you. This has been a beautiful and brilliant conversation. Thank you, everyone, for attending. I'm looking at the chat, they're coming in. Thank you for your time. Thank you for reading. If you can, please go and support Lighthouse Books. Thank you, everyone. Look at the chat. Thank you again, Maria, Sasha, and Elif.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so, so much. It was an
Thank you.
incredible time.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. I don't want to cut everyone off. Beautiful messages.
Yeah. Would I be able to read them afterwards? Because I was concentrating on the on our talk and didn't have a chance to go through the chat.
I think I might be able to save them.
It would be lovely because
Yes.
I was having glimpses of something interesting and was unable to follow.
Yes, this event will be recorded. We'll make that available on our YouTube channel afterward.
Ah, lovely.
Lovely. And if anyone is curious, we have another event coming up, February 25th. It's an event with 3 poets. Bradley has put the link in the chat. Lovely. Thank you, everyone. One last time before I end. Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much for having us here.